Hey readers, welcome back to Reads with Reem B. I hope you all have had a wonderful week. As with last week when I sent a shout out to all of those of you who have collected your GCSE results, today's shout goes out to all of you who are headed back to school. I know some of you in the States who listen to me have already been back for quite some time, but I hope that all of you have an amazing first week and have a first brilliant day back. Remember, you're perfect just the way you are, and also, please be excellent to one another. You never know what someone else is going through. Now, with that being said, let's read. Today's chapter is The Looking Glass Insects. Of course, the first thing to do was make a grand survey of the country she was going to be traveling through. It's something very like geography, thought Alice, and stood on tiptoes in hopes of being able to see a little further. The principal rivers, there are none. Principal mountains, I'm the only one, but I don't think it's got any name. I'm on the only one. Sorry, pardon me, readers. But I don't think it's got any name. Principal towns, why, what are those curious creatures making honey down there? They can't be bees. No one ever saw bees a mile off, you know. And for some time she stood silent, watching one of them that was bustling about among the flowers, poking its proboscis into them. It's just as if it were a regular bee, thought Alice. However, this was anything but a regular bee. In fact, it was an elephant, and as soon as Alice found out, though the idea quite took her breath away at first, what enormous flowers they must be, was her next idea. Something like cottages, with roofs taken off, and stocks put in them. What quantities of honey they must make. I think I'll go down. Oh, no, I won't just yet, she went on, checking herself, just as she was beginning to run down the hill, trying to find some excuse for turning shy so suddenly. It will never do to go down there among them without a good long branch to brush them away. And what fun it will be when they ask me how I liked my walk. I shall say, oh, I liked it well enough. And here came the favorite little toss of the head. Only it was so hot and dusty, and the elephants did tease so. Why, I think I'll go down the other way, she said, after a pause, and perhaps I may visit with the elephants later on. Besides, I do so want to get to the third square. And so, with this excuse, she ran down the hill and jumped over the first of the 6 little brooks. Pardon me for a minute, readers. I need to get my drink. Reach over. And again, pardon me, needed to get my drink. Tickets, please, said the guard, putting his head out the window. In a moment, everyone was holding out a ticket. They were about the same size as the people, and quite seemed to fill the carriage. Now then, show us your ticket, child, said the guard, looking angrily at Alice, and a great many voices said all together, like a chorus of a song, thought Alice, don't keep him waiting, child. Why, his time is worth £1,000 a minute. I'm afraid I haven't got one, said Alice in a frightened tone. There wasn't a ticket office where I came from. And a chorus of voices went on. There wasn't room for one where she came from. And the land there is worth £1,000 an inch. Don't make excuses, said the guard. You should have bought one from the engine driver. And once more the voices chorused. Went on with, the man that drives the engine, why, the smoke alone is worth £1,000 a puff. Alice thought to herself, there's no use in speaking. The voices didn't join in at all this time, as she hadn't spoken. But to her great surprise, they all thought in chorus. I hope you understand what thinking in a chorus means, for I must confess that I don't. Better to say nothing at all. Language is worth £1,000 a word. And there is Alice sitting on the train. I know I shall dream about £1,000 tonight. I know I shall, thought Alice, and all this time the guard was looking at her, first through the telescope, and then through a microscope, and then through an opera glass. At last he said, "You're travelling the wrong way," and shut the window up and went away. So young a child," said the gentleman sitting opposite her. He was dressed in paper white. "Ought to know which way she's going, even if she doesn't know her own name." A goat that was sitting next to that gentleman, also in white, shut his eyes and said in a loud voice, "She ought to know her way to the ticket office, even if she doesn't know her alphabet." There was a beetle sitting next to the goat, and it was very queer. It was a very queer carriage full of passengers all together, and the rule seemed to be that they should all speak in turn, and he went on with, She'll have to go back from here as luggage." Alice couldn't see who was sitting beyond the beetle, but a hoarse voice spoke next. The change engines, it said, and there it was, choked, and obligated to leave off. "It sounds like a horse," Alice thought to herself, in an extremely small voice. Close to her ear said, "You might make a joke on that. Something about a horse, and horse, you know." Then a very gentle voice in the distance said, "She must be labelled Lass with Care, you know." After that, the other voices went on. "What a number of people there are in the carriage," thought Alice, saying, "She must go by post. She's got a head on her. She must be sent as a message by telegraph. She must draw the train herself the rest of the way," and so on. But the gentleman dressed in paper white leaned forward and whispered in her ear, "Never mind what they all say, my dear, but take the return ticket every time the train stops." "Indeed I shan't," said Alice rather impatiently. "I don't belong to this railway at all. I was in the wood just now, and I wish I could get back there." "You might make a joke on that," said a little voice close to her ear. "Something about if you could, you know." "Don't tease so," said Alice, looking about in vain as to see where the voice came from. "If you're so anxious to have a joke, why don't you make one yourself?" The little voice sighed deeply. It was very unhappy, evidently, and Alice would have said something pitying to comfort it, if it would only sigh like other people, she thought. But this was such a wonderfully small sigh that she wouldn't have heard it at all, and if it hadn't come quite close to her ear. The consequence of this, that it tickled her ear very much, and quite took her thoughts off the unhappiness of the poor little creature. "You know you are a friend," said the little voice. "A dear, dear friend, an old friend, and you won't hurt me, though I am an insect." "An insect? What kind of insect?" Alice asked inquiringly, a little bit anxiously. What she really wanted to know was whether it was the sort that could sting or not, but she thought this wouldn't be a civil question to ask. "What, then you don't," little voice began, and then it was drowned out by the shrill scream of the engine, and everybody jumped up in alarm, Alice among the rest. The horse, who had put his head out the window, quietly drew it in and said, "It's only a brook we have to jump over," and everybody seemed satisfied with this. Though Alice felt a little nervous at the idea of trains jumping at all. "However, it'll take us on to the 4th square, and that's some comfort," she said to herself. In another moment she felt the carriage rise straight up into the air, and In her fright, she caught the thing nearest to her hand, which happened to be the goat's beard. The beard seemed to melt away as she touched it, and she found herself sitting quietly under some trees, while the gnat, for it was the insect she had been talking to, was balancing itself on a twig just over her head, and fanning her with its wings. It certainly was a very large gnat, about the size of a chicken, thought Alice, though she still couldn't help but feel nervous with it, even though they had been talking so long together. And here are some of our looking glass insects. We have a horsefly and the gnat. And then you don't like all insects, the gnat went on, as quietly as if nothing had happened. I like them when they can talk, said Alice. None of them have ever talked where I come from. What sort of insects do you rejoice in where you come from? The gnat inquired. I don't rejoice in insects at all, Alice explained, because, you see, I'm rather afraid of them. At least the large kinds. But I tell you the names of some, if you wish. Oh, of course, they answer to their names. The gnat marked carelessly. I never knew them to do it. What's the use of their having names, said the gnat, if they don't answer to them? It's no use to them, but it's useful to the people that name them, I suppose. If not, why do things have names at all? I can't say, the gnat replied. Further on the wood, down there, they've got no names, however. Go on with your list of insects. You're wasting time. Well, there's the horsefly, Alice began, counting the names off on her fingers. All right, said the gnat. Halfway up the bush you'll see a rocking horsefly, if you look. It's made entirely of wood, and it gets about by swinging itself from branch to branch. What does it live on? Asked Alice, with great curiosity. Sap and sawdust, said the gnat. Go on with the list. Alice looked up at the rocking horsefly with great interest, and made up her mind that it must have been repainted. It looked so bright and sticky. And then she went on. And look, there's a dragonfly. Look at the branch above your house. Look at the branch above your head, said the gnat, and there you'll find a snap dragonfly. Its body is a plum pudding, and its wings are holly leaves, and its head a raisin burning in brandy. What does it live on? Asked Alice, as before. Frumerantry and mince pie, replied the gnat, and it makes a nest in its Christmas box. And then there's the butterfly, Alice went on, after she had taken a good look at the insect with its head on fire, and thought to herself, I wonder if that's the reason insects are so fond of flying into candles, because they want to turn into snapdragonflies. And here is the snapdragonfly and the butterfly. Oops, sorry. Oh, there we go. Crawling at your feet, said the gnat. Alice drew her feet back in alarm. You may observe the bread and butterfly. Its wings are thin slices of bread and butter. Its body is a crust. Its head is a lump of sugar. And what does it live on? Weak tea with cream in it. A new difficulty came into Alice's head. Suppose it couldn't find any, she suggested. Why, then it would die, of course. But then that must happen so very often, Alice remarked. It always happens, said the gnat. And after this, Alice was silent for a moment or two, pondering. The gnat amused itself, meanwhile, by humming around and around her head, and at last it settled and remarked again, I suppose you don't want to lose your name. No, indeed, Alice said anxiously. And yet I don't know it. The gnat went on in a careless tone. Only think how convenient it would be if you could manage to go home without it. For instance, if the governess called you to your lessons, she would call out, 'Come here,' and then she would have to leave off because she wouldn't have any name for her, because there wouldn't be any name for her to call. And of course you wouldn't have to go because well, she wouldn't have called for you." "That would never do," "I'm sure," said Alice. "The governess would never think of excusing me from lessons for that. If she couldn't remember my name, she'd call me Miss, as the servants do." "Well, if she said Miss, and didn't say anything more," remarked the gnat, "of course you'd miss your lessons. That's the joke. I wish you had made it." "Why do you wish I had made it?" asked Alice. "It's a very bad one." But the gnat only sighed deeply, with 2 large tears came rolling down its cheeks. "You shouldn't make jokes," said Alice, "if it makes you so unhappy." I need another drink. Oh, I am so stuffed up, readers. And then came another of those melancholy little sighs, and this time the poor gnat really seemed to have sighed itself away. For when Alice looked up there was nothing whatsoever to be seen on the twig, and as she was getting quite chilly, sitting so still for so long, she got up and walked on, and very soon came to an open field, with a wood on one side of it. It looked much darker than the last wood, and Alice felt a little timid about going into it. However, on second thought, she made up her mind to go on, "for I certainly won't go back," she thought to herself. "This is the only way to the 8th square. This must be the wood," she said, thoughtfully to herself, "where things have no names. I wonder what will become of my name when I go in. I shouldn't like to lose it at all, because they'd have to give me another, and that would almost be certainly an ugly one. And then it would be but then the fun would be in trying to find the creature that had gotten my old name. Just like the advertisements, you know, when people lose dogs. Answers to the name of Dash had a brass collar on. Just fancy calling everything you meet Alice till one of them answered. Only they wouldn't answer at all if they were very wise." She was rambling on in this way when she reached the wood. It looked very cool and shady. "Well, at any rate, it's a great comfort," she said, and stepped under the trees. "After being so hot, and getting into what?" she went on, rather surprised at not being able to think of the word. "I mean, to get under this, you know." She put her hand on the trunk of the tree. "What does it call itself, I wonder? I do believe it's got no name. Why, to be sure it hasn't." She stood for a moment, silent, thinking, and then suddenly began again. "This really has happened, after all. Now, who am I? Will I remember I will remember if I can. I'm determined to do it." But determination didn't help her much, and all she could say, after a great deal of puzzling, I know it begins with L." And then, just then, a fawn wandered by. It looked at Alice with its large, gentle eyes, but didn't seem frightened at all. "Here, then! Here, then!" Alice called, as she held her hand out and tried to stroke it. But it only startled back a little, and then stood looking at her again. "What do you call yourself?" the fawn said at last. Such a soft, sweet voice it had. "I wish I knew," thought poor Alice. And then she answered rather sadly, "Nothing just now." And here is Alice with our fawn in the forest of nameless things. "Think again," it said. "That won't do." Alice thought, but nothing came. "Please, would you tell me what you call yourself?" she asked timidly. "I think that might help. If I tell you I'll tell you if you come a little further on," said the fawn. "I can't remember here." And so they walked on through the woods together, with Alice keeping her arms clasped lovingly around the soft neck of the fawn. Till they came out into another open field, and here the fawn gave a sudden bound into the air and shook itself free of Alice's arms. "I'm a fawn," it cried out in a voice of delight, "and, dear me, you're a human child!" A sudden look of alarm came into its beautiful brown eyes, and in another moment it had darted away at full speed. Alice stood there looking after it, almost ready to cry with vexation at having lost her dear little travel fellow so suddenly. "However, I know my name now," she said. "That's some comfort. Alice. Yes, Alice. I am Alice. I won't forget again. And now, which of these finger posts ought I to follow, I wonder?" It was not very difficult a question to answer, as there was only one road on through the wood, and two finger posts both pointing along it. "I'll settle it," Alice said to herself. "When the road divides, they'll point different ways, and then I shall follow the path that looks best." But this didn't seem very likely to happen. She went on and on, rather a long way. Whenever the road divided, there was sure to be two finger posts pointing the same way. One marked to Tweedledum's house, the other to Tweedledee's house. "I do believe," said Alice at last, "they live in the same house. I wonder. I never thought of that before, but I can't stay there long. I just can't. I'll just call, 'How do you do?' and ask them the way out of the wood. Yes, that's exactly what I shall do. If only I could get to the 8th square before it gets dark." So she wandered on, talking to herself as she went, until she came upon a sharp corner. She wandered on, talking to herself as she went, until, on turning a sharp corner, she came upon two fat little men. So suddenly she could not help but startling back. But in another moment she recovered herself, feeling sure that they must be, in fact, Tweedledum and Tweedledee. And there is Alice with Tweedledum and Tweedledee. And that is where our chapter ends. So I shall say goodbye for now, and keep reading. See you next time.